We're live here, baby.
It's very exciting. Nobody's seen this. It just came on. Nobody's
Just
even
now
there
happened.
yet.
Nobody's even arrived yet.
I'm gonna go there and share it to my page.
And we're recording.
Nobody's seen.
Ha ha!
Oh, it's
Yeah,
yes.
you have to mute this tab so that when you play Hansi later.
I'm doing it.
Okay. And we're recording.
Very good.
Just so you know.
There's total chaos in the middle of the table.
Nobody knows though, because this is out of frame. They only see this nice stuff that I've prepared for them to see. I'm gonna do my best not to yell to reach the live streamers today because I don't like my voice when I'm yelling.
I don't like my voice when I'm yelling either. I'm gonna try to be calm, cool, and collected.
As if we still had nice microphones in front of us.
And pretend we have nice microphones and
Right.
let everybody turn their volume up if they want to hear what's going on.
Gosh, because I really was like just yelling, you know?
The first week I yelled a lot.
Yeah.
Second week I think I was less yelly. Also I had fewer beers.
Fewer beers last week. Oh, what a low afternoon.
Yeah.
It's my chair doesn't go down any further. I have to tip this up a little bit so that
It says there's 3 people watching. Am I one of them?
Probably.
I forgot about putting that in the metric.
Yeah, you're probably one of the people watching me.
You and me are 2 of the people.
Well, I don't think it counts me as watching my own video.
Frank Bank and Azar.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Frank Bank is going to watch us while she cooks tonight.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that's fantastic. It's snowing here in Butte today. Well,
do you want to do like we're just starting a radio show?
I was just going to do that.
Okay, do it.
Just like you read my mind. You're now tuned into Post-Orthodoxy. This is a 2-hour radio show / podcast / live stream. I'm Ainsley Sevier, and with me is Citizen DJ Dark Sevier. And we do this twice a week, Thursdays and Sundays from 4 to 6 p.m. Right now, our live streams are airing on KBMF a few days after the fact because the entire station is off limits for the coronavirus.
Right.
For the safety of everybody involved. Last Sunday, our most recent show, we talked a lot about religion and politics and family and public versus private and how do you talk about things you're just not supposed to talk about or not talk about them and still have real relationships with people. And I did a whole bit on what's going on with me and my family right now. Post-Orthodoxy is a show about, changing our minds. It's a show about reality bubbles, realizing what bubbles we're in and if we want to be in them and how to get out of them. We talk about setting up an outpost in the borderlands. We talk about creating marks on the trail for other people who are trying to move beyond a stifling mindset or an environment that's not healthy for them, but they're afraid of what's out there in the big wide world. And Dark plunged out into the big wide world 30 years ago, and I just embarked on everything outside of Reformed evangelical purity Christian culture 4 years ago. And it's been up and down, and I've learned a lot, and I've had some really great friends and advisors along the way. And the last couple of weeks have been really draining for me because I'm finally acknowledging all of the grief that I carry around about being kicked out of my family, although they would say that I left.
You left. You stopped obeying the rules.
I stopped trying to make them love me 4 years ago, but I was kicked out many, many, many years before that.
Officially or
not officially, just
default.
that kind of way where like you treat somebody like crap until they don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, you treat somebody like crap until they start to act crappy, then you have something to blame on them.
So we're really grateful to everybody that's tuning in today on Facebook and on Twitch. If you like having these sorts of conversations or you know somebody where this sort of conversation might be helpful to them, Please share our video on your timeline. You can just share it right to your timeline. Don't start a watch party. That is just too complicated for all of us, and it involves separate comment streams, and I might not see things people comment. But if you're part of a support group that that has good opinions or journeys about unconditional love or about moving beyond fundamentalist mindsets, every person that shares this video helps us have a broader conversation with people. And then, since I'm going to have to chop this bit out for our radio show on Sunday anyway, please take a minute and follow us on Instagram at Post-Orthodoxy and check out my Patreon that I made because it's really funny.
You gonna post a link to the Patreon in the comments?
Yeah, I will.
I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for those of you that are new to the show, or maybe we sort of have to re-up who we are and what we're doing periodically. For me, the idea of the show of Post-Orthodoxy is how I really like the points that you articulated early in our producing of this show, where you talked about the psychological components around why would somebody leave their family or why would somebody leave their community, and what are those moments where you have to, your reality is challenged by another reality, and then what is that like in your head? What things do you have to go through to be so uncomfortable with the world that you're in that you have to venture into the unknown?
No, go lay down.
And I think for folks that have never had to make the journey, folks who've never had to go from one world to another world, one zeitgeist to another zeitgeist, one bubble to another bubble, some people who were never locked into a bubble don't, I think, often realize the ease with which they traverse worlds. Whereas people who were told that reality was one way, even after they realize that there are other ways, when you're raised in that mindset, the way that you process is in a very, very binary, black and white, right and wrong, us and them mindset.
It's like, I used to know what the correct version of right and wrong were, and then that was way too unhealthy for me, so I got out of that, and now I know the real version of right and wrong. People can often still find themselves stuck under an umbrella, an unnecessary umbrella of there are only ever two options in life.
I looked at it like when a thought comes in, it's like a ball that rolls into a split track, and it's going to go yes or no, right or wrong, up or down. It's going to go into one of the binaries. And when you're used to processing everything as a matter of survival, really, because when you're encountering new information, you have to decide whether it's the thing that agrees with your cult or the thing that disagrees with your cult. And if it disagrees with your cult, then it automatically goes into the bad category.
How are you going to handle it?
So you can't. So when that's your processing system, it takes a while before you can actually start to broaden your interpretation of events and not have to assign a verdict of good or bad, because often it's either one or the other. And so as we move into when a person moves beyond that narrow bubble into a broader realm, then even though they may be able to encounter things that are not binary, often the knee-jerk reaction is to put them into one side or the other side.
Even if your new reality has become... I'm abandoning that whole thought. You guys are going to have to forgive me today. I think I'm depressed.
You're a little depressed. Do you want to talk about why you're depressed?
Well...
Do we want to do...
It means I'm not functioning in ways that I'm used to functioning. And when I become aware that I'm not functioning as well as I normally do, it makes me feel panicky. So it's like this extra layer on top of just being depressed. And I mean, I think you can Google all of these things and learn these things for yourselves. I'm not a psychiatrist at all. But there are people who are clinically depressed. Like medically, their brain is always working on a less happy level a less energetic level, a less healthy level than the norm. I don't have that thing. I am a really happy person. And so experiencing sustained mellowness or sustained negative emotions such as sadness, my system doesn't really know how to handle it.
Were you growing up, so you and I were raised in different cults, but very, very narrow worlds. What were you allowed to do in terms of expression of sadness when you were in that world? What was allowed in terms of expression? Let's say you're disappointed or sad. Were you allowed to be disappointed or sad, or were you required to stuff it?
Well, it depends on what you're being disappointed or sad about.
Okay.
Like if you're being disappointed or sad about something that the parents have told you you have to do or can't do, that's not allowed. So say, to use an example from last week, because of my undiagnosed ADHD, it takes me 3 hours to do my math homework because I'm mostly staring out the window.
Yeah.
And my mom comes in and says, I can't believe it takes you this long to do math. I was going to let you go over to Cassie's house today, but I'm not going to be able to anymore because it took you so long to do your schoolwork.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully next time it won't take you as long. I can't have a bad attitude about that.
What happened to be?
I can only be disappointed or sad enough to hopefully incentivize me to do my math faster next time. I can't, so there are like the real world versions of these emotions, and then there's the words I was trained to use about them.
Okay.
So if I'm pouting,
okay,
or having a bad attitude,
bad attitude,
then I will have a worse punishment. So if she says, I was going to let you go to Cassie's house today, but it took you so long to do your math, I can't let you go anymore. I hope next time you will finish your math homework sooner. If I then turn around in my chair and express bodily disappointment or sadness or slump or have a negative expression on my face,
a natural reaction to the news. Yeah.
Then she'll say, and if you have a bad attitude about it, I'm not going to be able to let you go to Cassie's for the rest of the week.
Right, so it's a double smack.
And it's phrased in a way that makes it very clear, I'm the one doing this to me.
Yes, right.
It's not that my
fate
mom
is in your hands.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to let you go to Cassie's house.
Right. She won't be able to because you've made it too difficult.
I will have behaved so badly that it would not be appropriate for me to get to go play with a friend.
It's like neuro-linguistic programming. And for folks who've never been raised in a cult, this might just sound like typical parental stuff.
Right.
Like parents tell their kids to do something. You find ways to manage your kids.
Right.
Sometimes it's manipulative, sometimes it's honest. Sometimes you're honest with your parents or with your kids, and you talk to them, you walk them through their emotions so they know what they're feeling, and then you know what they're feeling. And then there's other parents who are just sort of don't want to deal with the messiness of somebody else's emotions. So you find ways to manage them by shutting them up or compartmentalizing. That's not only in cults. That's general human behavior. That's neuro-linguistic programming. That happens in the secular world. But like I was saying last week, like once you get 3 or 4 folks in a house, it already becomes a cult. You guys start to laugh at the same jokes that people who don't live in that house don't get.
Well, now, I mean, my best friends growing up, there were 12 kids.
Not necessarily in a bad way,
right?
But it becomes cult-like
and they
behavior.
did all, like, we used beach house as an exclamatory phrase, you know, like, we'd be like, oh my gosh, this is just my favorite movie of the whole summer, Beach House. And I know that sounds really weird, but it wasn't weird to all of us. Like, I understand what you're saying about it. Billie Jean, what do you need?
We're not playing that right now.
Yeah. I know for a fact you've been outside recently, so you need to go lay down. Go lay down. Go lay down. She might actually really need to pee.
Oh, jeez.
Can you describe...
let her out?
I can do it, but you tell the good folks what's your description of cult?
All right, well...
Because, like, saying if you have a family, you're in a cult sounds a little harsh.
It's pretty harsh and accurate. So I'm going to go to the dictionary definition of cult. Um, so there's different definitions, of course. So the first definition that comes up is a system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object. A relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. A misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing, a cult of personality. So, in my definition of the word cult, a cult is more like the second definition. It doesn't necessarily have to be religious beliefs. A small group of people regarded by others as having strange practices or beliefs that are strange. If you grow up in a strange, right? So if you grow up in a big family, you start to develop your own culture of the family. So that one incident happened with the dog that led to the catchphrase. Now every time you say the catchphrase, it means a thing.
But only people in your family know that.
But only the people in your family know that. So that is cult-like behavior. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. Like you having a catchphrase that has to do with the dog that everybody understands is not a good or bad thing. The problem comes, like last week I started talking about the public-private thing, and I lost my thread before I got to my point.
Right.
And the idea of what is acceptable, things that are acceptable in the house, or things that are regarded as normal in the house, are not done outside the house. Now that might be because people don't get your joke, or it might be that there is a cult-like order so that you are alienated from the rest of the world by this religious belief. Let's say we'll call it a religious belief. Mm-hmm. So you're alienated from the rest of the world. In my cult, in my family, our religion was the only one true religion.
Same here.
So everybody outside was basically going to hell, right? They were not real people. Our way of being
Christians was the only way of being Christians.
So to talk about how superior we were in the house was normal and a matter of course, but you learn early on that you can't do that outside because
people will look at you strange.
People will look at you strange. People might be offended that you are the only chosen person and then they're not chosen.
Right.
There's all kinds of different ways around that. And I think when you're raised in a cult, and you decide to get out of the limited perspective and you start thinking for yourself, you're going to end up breaking some rules. That's what keeps people in cults, right? You have a rule, don't break the rule, or we'll kick you out. So the fear of being kicked out is a big deal. Because if you don't know the rest of the world, they're throwing you into the wilds by kicking you out. So when you have this insulated cult-like behavior where there are mores involved, mores around sexuality, mores around all the mores involved of, is it okay to cuss or not cuss, to drink or not drink, is it okay, how do you deal with your parents? These are all a system of thought that doesn't translate to the outside world. So let's say you move beyond the cult, you've broken some rules, so now you are an outsider to them and dangerous. Because you've tangled with the devil.
Well, we all understand this
like COVID-19, you might now be contagious.
I'm a vector for sin and temptation to my family now, whether or not I act or speak like a sinner. So even though I still use biblical language around them, I don't swear, I don't try to pull them away from their beliefs, I do try to support them in their beliefs, I'm still considered a vector. I might tempt them away without even seeming like I'm doing it.
Right, so that's the fear of the people who are still in the bubble, is that you're outside and so now you're a wild card, you're potentially dangerous, and then you, who might still want to have a relationship with these folks, even though they're looking at you as scary and dangerous, there's this difficulty of reaching back into the bubble from which you came and having your communication be communication. Because they say the only true communication is that between equals. You're no longer an equal, if you ever were. But you're not an equal, and so your words that you are attempting to say are not landing in the places you're intending them to land. So it becomes difficult to communicate with the people who you used to be in communion with. And the public-private thing becomes difficult because now, if you want to examine some of the behavior you were subjected to in this family or in this cult or in this religion, if you want to examine that stuff, figure out what was healthy, what was not healthy, and it's interlinked to these individuals in your family. If you begin to try to talk to people about that, the people in the family can take that as a betrayal.
Right. Can't even ask.
You've made their private public.
Yes.
This is what keeps people in cults, is because if you start to talk about where you came from, and then people say, my God, that's insane, then your family feels like you are calling them insane.
I'm inciting people to think
Yes.
badly of my parents.
Right. So this is what I find really dangerous about public-private. This is how incest goes on in the secular world, where somebody in the house, we have the little secret we don't talk about because we're special people and we do special things. It happens with incest.
They won't
it happens with
understand
religion.
out there.
Yeah, they won't understand out there. It's very special what we have. And so when you get out and you try to rectify your two worlds, the two worlds of who we are at home and who we are in the family, it can be really maddening and schizophrenic. Feel schizophrenic because they're different worlds, totally. And so for you to be in a cult, having been out for a relatively small period of time, you're trying to process what all that stuff was, and you also want to continue a relationship with your family.
Yes.
And
specifically, my 6 younger brothers and sisters, who I helped raise. That's the sticking point. That's the thing that's been really hard for me. That's been the modus of all of my work. I stayed married as long as I did because of my siblings. In the last year before the thought that maybe I might get a divorce popped into my head, I was planning a giant tattoo for my forearm where I had envisioned a silhouette of a tree, and in the branches, in the barren branches of the tree, would be the silhouette of a little animal that represented each of my siblings. Like their spirit animal. I would pick what I thought their spirit animal was and put them all in this tree on my arm, so that every time I saw it and thought about anything or was going to do anything, I would remember that I was living for their sake.
Right. Wow.
I was sitting on a sidewalk curb in Fairfax, Virginia, visiting my childhood best friend, and thinking that I would get this tattoo, and that's the level of desperation that I was at, that I hadn't even realized yet, that I was I need to mark myself so that I remember all the stuff that I'm going through is for the sake of my siblings, and it's worth it, because they're looking up to me, and they trust me, and they love me, and I want them to know that I'm a safe space. It's my job to raise them. And all of the work that I've been doing over the last 4 years, since not being able to keep that up anymore, has been to try to find a way to be a part of their life in some way. It would have been so much easier if I hadn't had any younger siblings, and I would have just said, I'm sorry, Mom, the way that you trained me to live is making me sick. I can't do it anymore, and I hope someday you can forgive me and we can talk again, and just moved on.
Right.
But the children that I raised are still living in that home, and my baby sister is only 11, and I'm desperate to keep doing the work to a point that I was just talking with my therapist today, and she's like, well, if you move to Virginia to be near your family, what if your parents tell you, I'm sorry, we don't want you coming over anymore? I would rather that than the limbo that I'm in right now. Because right now, my mom doesn't want to hear about my boyfriend. She doesn't want to hear how we got engaged. She doesn't want to hear about his name or use his name or ask him about me. But she sent us a Christmas package with presents with both of our names on it.
That's nice.
It's a limbo. It's a poisonous, exhausting limbo.
You're at a safe distance right now.
I am. It's very safe for them to just pray for my repentance every night over dinner, because I'm not real. I'm not really in their world. I would rather move to Virginia and say, Mom and Dad, here's what I want to do. I want to try to come over for family dinner once a week, go on a hike with you guys every once in a while, help the girls with their language studies during school time when everybody's around and you feel like it's safe. And I would rather have them say, you know what, we're sorry, but you don't get to talk to our kids until they turn 18. Because then they would have had to verbalize their feelings, and it would be healthier for them also. Mm-hmm. It would be healthier for my parents to have to be faced with me actually being a part of their life, and what are they going to do about it, and how does their Christianity survive that decision, than for them to be able to exist in this limbo where it's very easy to just be sad about me and not talk to me and pray for my repentance every night. So anyway.
So we've been doing this show since August, and Ainsley has been brave enough to be the person who is live streaming her journey from one place to another. Like things that were reality before, periodically, you just don't get out and everything has changed. There's like whole rooms of experience that had to be rectified with a new world.
Yeah.
And so...
languages that need to be rewritten, and codes, right, and viewfinders.
Right. So for people who've been listening to the show, at one point, like I said, she's new to the world, to the secular world. So when she had to re-evaluate her perspective on creationism versus evolution, she did that live on air. She basically...
I was angry.
Yeah.
For like 3 weeks.
Yeah. So...
having to realize that I was brainwashed, and I had been trained to mock and ignore scientists.
Yes.
Like, I still laugh. We were just walking through Hell's Half Acre yesterday, which is lava flows.
In Idaho.
It's really beautiful. And there are plaques everywhere, as there are in interpretive centers, that talk about how 4,000 years ago some volcano erupted. And I'm reading it out loud, and things just happen. Like, I just blurt out, like, yeah, how do they know that?
Right.
Because that's what I was trained to do.
Right.
Like, and Dark's like, are you really saying this, or is this past Ainsley saying this? I'm like, it's kind of like popping a zit. You just have to get it out.
You have to keep saying the things that you used to mock to see how your inner brain is mocking things all the time. If you don't externalize it, you just keep doing it inside.
Yes,
that
exactly. I have to put it out there so I can hear how ridiculous it sounds.
So, I felt like that process was important, even though potentially embarrassing, which I thought you were very brave to come out and say, this is the way I was trained.
Because you find it embarrassing.
I myself would be too embarrassed to do it. Like, I hid my cult-like perspectives and went stealth for years to slowly integrate him because I was too embarrassed to say what I was trained to be and act the way that I was trained to act. So I knew that it wasn't working, but I did it stealth. You're much more forthright and honest about your process, which I think is amazing. And I think for people who've never had to take this journey, I think it's important for people who are identifying with this process and people who have never gone through this process and may never go through this process, because these are the battles that people fight around you all the time. There are people in your neighborhood all the time that are dealing with a kind of schizophrenic reality, especially right. People who have religious trauma, where they came from a reality and then had to integrate into a world where that reality was not the one and only. There's almost like a dual processing that goes on all the time. It's not just straight information. You have to sometimes have the information go in, it goes through the filter, you have to evaluate if that's relative in this world or relative in the old world or actually relative in both worlds before you actually say stuff. And so it can be difficult to shed some of this training when you're in a cult unless you externalize it and you compare and contrast to other people. So I didn't have any idea of what healthy emotions were. Anger and rage was the same thing in my book. I didn't know the difference between anger and rage. It took me years outside to actually learn how to have healthy emotions.
Oh, rather than just suppressing everything because you never saw them being expressed correctly.
Suck it up, suck it up, suck it up. So like my parents' emotions were rather brutal, and my emotions were mutated so they didn't have to see them. Right? So there were no examples of healthy emotions of being upset, processing what you're upset about, and moving on. Mm-hmm. Everything is just stuffed. So in order to process this stuff, you've been doing your best to try to have communication across a void. And I think now you're starting to understand what that void, the depth of the void. Logic and reason doesn't work anymore.
No.
So for folks who...
Well, here, let me, because that's my alarm to remind us to go to the radio station, but we can't do the show at the radio station anymore. I need to turn it off. We have several people who are participating in the show today. Oh, yeah? It's really, really wonderful. Jeremy John from Chicago. I was in school at University of North Carolina, Greensboro with him like 7 years ago when I was still married, and watching him go through his process of like bursting out of whatever, and I didn't know him well enough to know everything he was going through, but I could just see him struggling, and watching him burst out of his, as he just said on the stream, his cult family background, who were saying you can only be loved by God if you are this way. Right. And then realizing that he could choose to be himself and be loved by God.
So within the Christian paradigm, he found a way to break out of a
I don't know if he went completely beyond Christianity and came back. I do know that I've honestly been thinking about Jeremy a lot because as I interact with Christians who express unconditional love, I begin to have these sorts of feelings that I threw the baby out with the bathwater. If in the grand scheme of the world, there are a variety of spiritual practices you can choose, and those spiritual practices can be performed malignantly or lovingly, and Christianity is one of the spiritual practices that has been performed malignantly and lovingly on the planet.
Right.
I didn't necessarily have to be never a Christian again.
Right.
But because of the kind of Christianity I was raised in, and this is to kind of answer Chrissy Hadley's question. She's like, what was your background, right? She's like, because of I was raised Reformed Evangelical Christian, which meant extreme biblical study, extreme church fathers study, Luther and Calvin, R.C. Sproul, C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton, tons of reading, tons of studying, very liturgical church. So like a Catholic church service or a Lutheran church service where everybody does certain things at certain times.
Women have certain roles.
And there are a lot of rules about women and a lot of rules about sex and relationships.
Purity culture.
Purity culture. You're not supposed to do anything up to and including kissing or holding hands until the day you're married.
So it's pretty much, it's a not really fond of natural things.
But so I was raised so strict that when I realized I couldn't be married anymore and be healthy, the Christianity that I was raised in, the rule was one and done. It's not like they talk about justification and sanctification a lot. Justification is the moment you become part of the family of God. And sanctification is the journey of getting over your sins and working through your mistakes and falling and rising and seeking forgiveness over and over again. You sanctify until you die, and then you're just in heaven. But in spite of that talk of sanctification, the journey of recovering from mistakes, the journey of grace, you are saved by grace through faith, not by your works. And like literally Martin Luther's creed is we are not saved by works, because Martin Luther was getting the church away from Catholicism, which is very much you have to behave a certain way, especially in the Reformation days, 500 years ago. You have to behave a certain way or you're going to hell, and you better also pay us. And Martin Luther was like, I'm pretty sure that Paul said in Romans, you're saved by grace through faith, not by works.
Right.
So that nobody's better than anybody else. It's God that did it. You didn't save yourself. God saved you. And nothing can separate you from the love of God. So in spite of all of this, I knew in my heart, if I was going to get a divorce, I was basically turning my back on Christianity, because the version of Christianity I was given was totalitarian, and you don't get divorced.
There's no getting over that.
And I had watched my family and the other people in that church ostracize divorcees over and over again.
So somebody gets divorced, and
You
they
knew you shouldn't have done that, and you did it anyway.
So were they excommunicated from the church, or were they it was just made too uncomfortable for them to be around anymore?
I don't know. I don't know if I was ever excommunicated. One of my age mates was excommunicated for marrying a non-Christian.
Okay. So that's the cutoff valve for cults, is that anybody who, it's almost like the cookie jar thing, like there's the thing that you're not supposed to do. If you do it, then it's like Adam eating the apple, the fruit of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. It's like once you eat, now you know, and you can't fold back in now that you know.
You know what the right thing to do is, and so if you intentionally don't do it, then you are blatantly sinning, which is a sign of...
Right, but it's also the experience. So like if you have a wall that you're not supposed to go through, and you go through the wall and you see what's on the other side of the wall, you're now dangerous. Because it's important for people not to ever think what's on the other side of the wall. It needs to be a deep, dark, scary place. That's what keeps people in line, and that's what keeps people from breaking the law.
You're thinking from the perspective of somebody who's outside.
Yes.
That's...
Well, on purpose.
We have to differentiate all the time, and the more I reconnect, I'm learning a lot of things over the past couple of weeks. I've learned a lot of things over the past 4 years. I'm learning a lot of things over the past couple of weeks. Like that sense that maybe I didn't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Maybe if I had had even one person in my life at that time who was a Christian mentor, who had been guiding me towards Jesus's words, I wouldn't have landed quite so hard.
Right.
Maybe I wouldn't have had to say, I guess I never get to be a Christian again because I'm not doing it the right way. So sort of like that. I'm also learning that even though I have a personal quest to express from the kingdom of love, to speak from the kingdom of love rather than from the kingdom of hate or fear all the time, in my excitement to achieve clarity about the very strict, judgmental, unloving kind of Christianity that I came from, I've been barfing all of this knowledge about Christianity onto the internet that's been really hurtful for some very dear friends of mine who don't realize I'm not talking about them.
Well, it's all the same thing. It's that monotheistic problem, is that the entire Bible is infallible, so you can't pick one word out and say, well, the Bible's right except for this part. The whole thing is of a package.
Right, exactly.
So you can't, if you criticize Christianity, people only know their Christianity, and so therefore you're criticizing them because it's their identity.
There are a lot of really lovely Christians who are actually following Jesus and putting love and grace and non-judgment into the world, who don't know that there are a lot of really horrible Christians out there who have been given permission by their God to be judgmental narcissists.
Yes.
And so, when I post a meme on my Facebook story about how Christians voted for a president who perpetuates and worsens the condition of children living in cages on cement floors on U.S. soil, they think I'm saying they are Nazis.
That's a personal indictment of that person.
And I'm like, I'm not saying you're Nazis. I know if you could go help the children in cages on U.S. soil, you would. I'm talking about the other Christians that do think the Constitution is almost as important as the Bible, and the Constitution says get into this country legally, and so if you are getting into this country illegally, that means you are a criminal, and therefore you should be in a cage, because you knew what was going to happen to you if you behaved that way.
You put yourself in that cage.
You put yourself, and that's what my parents think of me. I put myself in the cage of ostracization from them by doing things that I knew they could not approve of.
Okay, so walking it through folks that don't have these experiences, she decided that she was miserable in her marriage, and part of it was because of all the training that led up to the marriage, all the brainwashing and all the rules, unhealthy rules, secrecy, and this public-private nonsense. So Ainsley gets a divorce. She's now apostate, which means that she's a dangerous person who's
a vector for temptation.
A vector, like a COVID-19 vector, but a vector for temptation, a vector for evil. So this is parents and siblings that have now turned their own family member into a dangerous person in their mind.
I can't trust you.
Right.
Let's just talk about hairstyles and recipes.
So they get to then spend their life praying for you.
For my repentance.
So to pray for you and pray for your repentance is constantly, daily,
yes,
reinforcing the fact that you have fallen and that
they're reinforcing it with each other.
Bad. You're
yeah.
bad.
I'm bad. I'm dangerous, and it's sad. So they don't know. They're not on social media. They don't know anything about my life. My siblings. They don't know what I'm doing. They don't know all of the wonderful friends that I have. They don't know the work that I'm working on. They don't actually even know where I stand with their God. They just make assumptions. Because I got divorced and stopped attending church every Sunday, I must therefore be not Christian. Bad.
Right.
Dangerous.
Right. Yes.
You
So now you're trying. Now, so now you're trying to communicate back with your family.
Well, not now. I've always been, but I'm trying to get out of limbo.
Right.
I realized today talking with my therapist that I've been trying to get out of limbo. It's exhausting. I have projects that I really care about. I have a partner that I really care about, that I want to be able to focus on my life now and moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been in an exhausting space of limbo where I don't really know what my family thinks about me, and I'm heartbroken all the time that I've been ostracized from them. And I know that they think I cut myself off because I knew my actions would cause me to be kicked out.
Right.
But I still feel it as they have kicked me out. And I want to, like when you send me Christmas presents but refuse to turn my emails, things feel a little weird. And so I basically said, we need to clarify what kind of relationship do we actually have. And I've reached out very clearly and several times to my mother, like, can we talk? And I've started having conversations with my siblings who will take the time to talk to me. And I have one sibling who's a full-time mother who just moved across the country, so she gets a pass. And I have another sister who is a full-time mother and has not wanted to talk to me for a long time. She was really heartbroken and disappointed and pissed off when I got divorced. And that was basically the end of our tiny bit of a relationship. But I've been starting other conversations with my siblings. I've started having more conversations with all my elders, like my grandparents and aunts and uncles and things like that. And I made the decision last week, right before our live show on Sunday, to disconnect from my mother on Facebook.
Right.
So she can't see my life anymore. She can only pray for me, I guess.
So
because she refused to respond to my emails.
You were trying to communicate. She refused to respond. She refused to answer. She refused to respond. But she can still creep your Facebook page, take your information out of context, create a narrative on the premise that you're a bad person. So the premise is you're a bad person. So any kind of information they squeeze into that narrative, and then that's the story within the family of who you are.
Right.
So you cutting her off is not out of spite. It's actually, ironically, an attempt to have clear communication.
Real, honest communication with my mom.
So you've asked her to have that communication. She wouldn't do it. So you decided, well, you can't creep my Facebook anymore. If you want to know what's going on with me, you can call me.
Yeah.
Or you can write me.
Or email me.
Right. So that's a tough decision to make. And then it has
and then now I'm talking about it online.
Yes.
Which you're also not supposed to do.
Well, that's the public-private thing. How do you understand the insanity of where you came from unless other people say, holy cow, that's insane?
Here's something that my kind of Christianity did not give me.
Okay.
The ability to know my own intentions.
Right.
My kind of Christianity told me, here's how you know when something is sin, and here's how you know when something is not sin. You can't know for yourself. You just have to follow these rules. Even if it feels wrong, if the Bible says it's okay, you should do it. And even if it feels right, if the Bible says it's wrong, you shouldn't do it. And the kind of Christianity I was raised in expanded the Bible to also include various church fathers and other writers as if they were as important as Jesus' actual words.
Right.
So this is where the conversation of marital rape comes in. Because the Bible says the wife belongs to the husband and the husband belongs to the wife. And it doesn't matter if one spouse or the other doesn't feel like having sex. You should do it anyway because you belong to your spouse.
Right.
And then in the same vein, even if it feels right and life-giving and powerful to you to go to a music festival and wander around with friends all day and dance and listen to amazing music from all over the world, the Bible says, and by extension, church fathers, that that kind of display is inappropriate and full of yourself, and it's worshiping, it's idolizing musicians when
you're cheating on God, having a better time somewhere else.
You're cheating on God by having a better time somewhere else. So even though it feels life-giving and right, it's wrong. And so you can't trust your intuition. You can't trust your gut. You can't. There's a Bible verse that says the heart is deceitful above all else, and that's what gets pulled out all the time out of context to talk about this. And so me feeling like it's right, it's not right that my mom snoops on my Facebook but doesn't talk to me.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. In her world, no matter how happy I am, I'm living in sin.
So I want to talk about this notion of not being able to know for yourself. You gave me this wonderful image. I think it was you. You gave me the wonderful image of the little girl who's been outside.
Oh, you're going to make me cry. I'm like on a trigger right now.
Is it okay?
No, it's fine. I'm just super emotional.
So the idea of like this little girl is outside. She loves her mom, so she goes and picks flowers for her mom. And her mom's being a good Christian mom, so cleaning the house and all that business. So she comes in with this big bright face with flowers for mom, but all mom sees is muddy footprints on the floor she has just mopped. And so mom freaks out. And now the child doesn't know what is going on because their intention was to give flowers to somebody they love. And what was the reaction? Outrage. So then you don't know what your own feelings are. When enough of those moments happen, and that's just a secular version of what happens, but in a religious context, you're constantly doing something that feels natural and then being told you're incorrect. So this is that bifurcated brain thing that I talk about when you're in a cult, is that you get information and your animal self says yes, but then it has to go through a labyrinthian track to figure out if it lands in the good or bad category.
And you have anxiety.
And you have anxiety because you don't know how to trust yourself. You don't know how to make an intuitive response and say, this is good for me, or this is not good for me.
Well, and in my case, I never know, even if I'm intending to do the right thing, I never know when somebody's going to come along and tell me that I was messing up and actually hurting people the whole time.
You don't know.
I can never know if I'm actually doing something that's good or not.
Right. So this is the problem of like trying to go back and talk to the family, is that you don't have a clear line of thought to you don't have a clear communication with yourself to go in and know that what you're saying is correct and know where they are misinterpreting things, because you could just be wrong all the time, because that's what you were told your entire life. You're wrong all the time. You're not doing it right. See, here it says do it this way.
Well, and so to take a moment from my mother's perspective, because I brought up things like this with her, like the little girl who runs into the house with muddy feet to give mom flowers, and the mom berates her for getting the floor muddy. And I would bring up stuff like that with my mom, where I was like, I didn't mean to such and such, or what I meant was such and such. And my mom would say something like, to continue this example, if that little girl actually loved her mom, then she would care about the things that matter to her mom, such as the clean floor.
Right.
And she would remember that she's been told hundreds of times to take her shoes off before she comes inside.
That was your mom's response to that?
Yes.
So that's assuming that a 4-year-old has all the cognitive functioning.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. See, we talked about that last week, the problem of only being held responsible for what you can actually know at your level of development.
Well, I mean, like, the metaphor is all well and good when we're talking about a 4-year-old who is probably excited and doesn't remember because they don't care about clean floors.
Right. It's not important.
But when we're talking about, say, Billie Jean, she doesn't like that we're giving you guys our attention and not her, apparently. Right. Come here. When we talk about a 13-year-old, who's been told, take your laundry upstairs, know? And so I take my laundry upstairs to the bedroom, and on the way down from the bedroom, I don't grab the box of tea set dishes that need to be washed after the recent tea party. And when I get to the bottom of the stairs, my mom's like, why didn't you bring the tea party dishes downstairs? They were sitting at the top of the stairs waiting to come down.
Why didn't you?
Well, in my case, I would say probably because of my undiagnosed ADHD.
Okay.
And my job was to take laundry to bedroom and come back.
So you're focusing on the job at hand.
Hyper focus.
Right.
It's different for everybody. That's the thing, is like the kind of Christianity that I was raised in, and I think it's really more increasingly important to differentiate.
Yes.
That you and I were raised in a kind of Christianity that millions of people don't practice.
They don't practice, and yet because of this. Well, I'm going to go back to the public-private thing. Because of this, the evangelical world is a big part of the world that you live in, whether you know anything about it or not. It's dominating a lot of our politics. It's dominating a lot of our policy. It's dominating a lot of our fiscal policy. It's dominating a lot of our foreign policy because of this strange Jewish American Zionism. So the idea of these really fundamentalist Christian people are really waiting for the business to go down in Israel, where Israel finally gets its own country, all of it, genocide be damned. And then when that happens, some temple breaks, and then Jesus comes back and is like, haha, Jews thought they were the leaders, but it's actually us, suckers. So a lot of our foreign policy, economic policy, and politics is done by these zealots because they're not complex folks. They have clear visions and clear missions, and they don't have a lot of nonsense. So you have a lot of people in politics that are deciding how the world is going to work for you. So I think that's, to me, the importance of being able to give an insider's perspective of what's happening with these folks, because they are affecting the world that you live in. And the struggle that she's having, which is like, how do I continue to love people and show love and be in the lives of people who cannot recognize that kind of love? And last week we were going to talk about the Four Loves. There's a C.S. Lewis book called The Four Loves.
He didn't invent them.
He didn't invent it,
but he's a great writer.
He's a Christian author that's considered a Christian author, right?
Right, but he spent a very good portion of his life as an atheist.
Right.
And was touted as the return to Christ story.
Great, and so I like a lot of his writing because he can walk between worlds. He's lived in both worlds. And so the idea of dealing with these various kinds of love, the problem of trying to reach back and talk to people who are in a world that they've never left. Now you look crazy coming back and talking to them because you're dealing with things that are not in their world. So when you come back and you try to talk to these folks, it's very difficult to know if the words that you're using are landing where you want them to land.
I'm realizing more and more through the past few weeks of intentional conversations, trying to get to know where we stand, that it doesn't matter which words I use. Certain members of the family are just going to see me as an untrustworthy vector for temptation, apostate sinner.
Right.
And other members of the family actually hear my words and my intentions. That's been really reassuring, finding out which ones actually hear what I'm actually saying.
So if you're going to try to talk Bible, because you know Bible, you read the Bible a few hundred times.
Yeah.
You can do that,
Bible.
But you're not in the fold anymore, so it's suspect. Even your interpretation is suspect.
It's actually more suspicious when I try to use biblical language.
Right, because it seems even more deceptive. So that's where, for myself, when I was dealing with these struggles, whether in my family or outside my family, I had to start using terms, instead of good or bad, I had to start using terms like healthy or unhealthy. So I couldn't tell people that, like, you said it was bad, but I think it's good. I had to actually use a subjective term of like I was unhealthy in this situation. I changed the situation that broke a rule for you, but now I feel healthier. Now to them, I'm just obviously delusional.
Right. Yes, the more I insist that maybe it was the right decision, the more I must be delusional.
Yes.
And here's why. Because it can't be okay for me to have begun to make my own choices about my faith, because then it would be okay for them to make their own choices about their faith.
Right.
And then they might get ostracized too.
Or they might have wasted their lives believing a lie.
They might have wasted time thinking that they had to be this miserable in order to get into heaven.
Right.
When they didn't actually have to be that miserable.
They didn't have to be that miserable. No.
Doreen says that as a grown-up who left the church that we're speaking about, she'd love to chat on our show sometime.
Oh, great.
And we can actually do that. We have the technology now. Everybody's using it these days. Zoom.
Right.
We can have a three-way video chat where Doreen can participate in our radio show, and then we can save the audio and share it with people. We can have a live conversation. I'm pretty sure I'll have to do a little bit of work between now and Sunday.
We had some Twitch comments, right?
We have some great comments going on.
What do you got?
So Gilbert says, saying you're a Christian doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make you a good person. It's your actions that count. And there's a Bible verse for that.
Yeah.
The trees that bear good fruit are the good trees. It's like saying or identifying as a Republican. It's like saying that identifying as a Republican makes you fiscally conservative, or identifying as a Democrat makes you socially conscious. Those are just identities. Andrea Crossgun says, unconditional love. I love you without any expectation, including the expectation that you love me back. And we do need to talk about unconditional love, and it's going to be hard because we need to talk about, am I expressing unconditional love by setting a boundary with my mom? And how does unconditional love get taken advantage of by abusers? And what's the right version? What's the healthy version of unconditional love? How do you take care of yourself and also have unconditional love? Can you have boundaries and also have unconditional love? I really do want to talk about the 4 agreements. I want to talk about the 4 loves. I think we have a lot to learn about love as a society. It's been distilled down to one word and a holiday and a bunch of commercialism and a bunch of disappointment and a bunch of people who don't know themselves well enough to be in a loving relationship. Doreen says, this breaks my heart as a mom who was also misled. And I know that last year, when my parents started refusing to talk to me about questions that I had, I posted a note, and this was after cumulative problems for my whole life. I posted a note on Facebook where I processed some things that I was going through in honor of Father's Day.
Right.
I don't want to just call my dad and wish him Happy Father's Day when he has refused to return my texts and my calls for a month.
Yeah, he doesn't get that then.
And what does that mean? And who does that make me? And should I just swallow that? And I made it very clear in my note, like, this is my perspective on my childhood.
Right.
And I want to hear my mom's perspective. And if I think the healthiest thing would be if she were to tell me her perspective and her influences and the people that trained her to think certain ways and the reasons that she did certain things. But over and over again, as I have asked and asked and asked, and I really haven't started asking in the last year, I've always tried to figure out how my mom and I can compare perspectives and get along, because I know she was trying to love me as best she knew how, and that she was heavily influenced by the church.
Yes.
The kind of church that she was in. But Doreen was really heartbroken over that note, because she knows my mom and loves her, and she was in the same church that I grew up in, and had some pretty horrible experiences with that church and left.
Yeah.
My mom hasn't left. And thankfully, Doreen and I have talked since then, and her daughter and I, Frank, has been a great mediator between us, because the last thing I want is for somebody to think I'm just dishing on my parents online for no reason.
Well, that's the public-private thing. That's why I think it's really important.
Right.
You need to be able to share your experience in order to understand your experience in a new context. And I think you making that choice to make a public post about your experience, because you own your life, you own your own experience, and if you cannot get closure with the folks there, you have to go somewhere else.
Well, and I think it brings us back to the conversation of intentions. My intention with sharing that Facebook post was, one, my own health. I had been bottling stuff up for years and years and years, partially because for a long time I assumed I must be a bad daughter because they keep telling me I'm a bad daughter. I must really be rebellious and deceitful and disrespectful and horrible because that's what they told me, and a slut. Like, I must really be all those things, so I bottled it up. And then even when I started acknowledging to myself, I don't actually think if I am those things.
Right.
I don't actually think I was being a slut just because I wanted to text a boy that I liked.
Right.
I don't actually think that I was being rebellious by asking, why can't we fold pants without the crease down the front, because I think it looks stupid because I'm not a dad, you know?
Right.
And like in that moment you could just say, well, we fold it with the crease down the front because your father's a professional and that's the way we should fold pants for professionals, you know? But instead it's like, why are you so rebellious?
Right.
You know, so it's like, one, I needed to process for my health and acknowledge that I didn't need to bottle everything up anymore because I wasn't actually the things that they gaslit me into thinking I was.
Right.
And two, my intention with posting a note like that, and I said so in the note, was that I wanted to be helpful for other people who felt like they didn't have any ability to process their relationship with their parents or their children. They felt like they were hitting a brick wall. They felt like maybe they had gone through those things and thought they were crazy for being sad.
Right.
Like, I thought I was crazy for being sad that my parents didn't like me. I thought I was crazy because I should just be able to acknowledge that I'm rebellious and they treated me appropriately to my behavior. And somebody else might need to realize that love isn't like that. That's not what love is. But my parents were trained and brainwashed by this particular cultish conservative Christian group that love is conditional.
Love is conditional. That's a
You behave and receive affection and approval accordingly to your behavior.
Believe or die.
Yeah, also that.
Yeah.
So, Doreen said she was really sad about the note because she was afraid maybe her kids secretly thought the same way about her.
Right.
Which I hope led to some really great conversations.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I started this whole thing 2 weeks ago, when I was considering, I've been wanting to block my mom on Facebook for like a year, but I used to want it in what I feel was an unhealthy intention. It wasn't fair. It was an attitude. I had an attitude that I knew wasn't unhealthy. My mom doesn't get to see what I'm doing and not talk to me.
Right.
That's not fair.
Right.
She never posts on Facebook. Maybe if there were more photos of my sisters and brothers and nieces and nephews, I wouldn't mind the exchange of Facebook relationship without any other kind of relationship.
Right.
But a couple weeks ago, when I started these conversations with my siblings to get to know them better and to get to know what they thought of me, and I finally had the opportunity to answer their questions of why did you get a divorce? Why did you stop going to church? Why have you changed so much? And be able to explain to them, like, here are the reasons. Here's what I went through. And then realizing that a couple of the siblings were thinking their own thoughts and expressing love, even though they didn't agree with what I did, and they were glad we were talking. And another sibling was really hurt and took what I said back to my mom and the sister who doesn't talk to me and compared notes with them and believed their version of the story, that I was in fact untrustworthy and apostate and a vector for temptation, and that she was really hurt by what I did, leaving my husband and stopping going to church, and that I needed to repent and ask for forgiveness. And until then, she didn't really want to talk to me about anything in particular except, hairstyles and the weather.
They just got to pray harder, I guess.
So when I started realizing that my mother was still so very much influencing my siblings' relationship with me because of my mother's bad opinion of me, I realized that it wasn't healthy for my mom or for me for her to be able to see into my life out of context.
It's way out of context.
she's only seeing pieces of things that I post online. Up until the coronavirus time, I wasn't incredibly active on Facebook.
Right.
I prefer one-on-one conversations. My mother
Right.
just wouldn't have one-on-one conversations with me. And so when I started realizing through my siblings that my mom was taking things she saw online out of context and interpreting them through her idea of me as an untrustworthy apostate,
Mm-hmm.
and then telling my siblings, reinforcing that idea of me with my younger siblings, who I have no interactions with, I decided to disconnect from her online in the hopes of having a real conversation with her.
Mm.
And I wrote an email and then sat on it for 4 days, which is very good advice.
Yeah.
If you ever have to do stuff like this, it can always wait another day. And I called my friend Frank because I remembered that she had made lifestyle changes her mom didn't like. And then over the course of a couple years, she and her mom started having a relationship again. And I remember Frank telling me, at one point, my mom tried to put her foot down and was either like, it's me or the boyfriend that you're living in sin with.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank was like, I don't want to choose. I refuse the false dichotomy.
Right.
And the mom did like a ton of really hardcore work to get to know her own self and to get to know Jesus and to get to know what does it mean to have unconditional love for someone. And now she and her daughter have a relationship. And so I called some of those people. Right. I was like, how did you do it? How did you set a boundary and it worked? Tell me that setting a boundary is going to work, because I need a little bit of hope right now.
Part of the problem is that your mom's been in an ego battle with you since you were a little kid. It didn't have anything to do with the divorce. The divorce was an excuse to finally feel righteous in their...
She always knew I was going to break my husband's heart.
They got to feel righteous in you being an apostate, and they spent most of your life fighting you.
Yeah, I tried to remind them last year that they haven't just been ostracizing me since I got a divorce.
No, there's like my dad was in an ego battle with his firstborn daughter, and they clashed their entire lives. Like she wasn't going to eat the peas in the high chair, and he was going to make her sit in the high chair until she ate the peas. Like that battle has just carried through their whole life.
That's not an ego battle. That's parents doing what's good for the children.
No,
you know how many times my sister had to get back in her high chair and eat the heated... It was like, meal 1, you don't eat it. Meal 2, you get it heated up for you. Meal 3, we're not going to heat it up for you. You just have to eat it cold. She went through like 5 meals not eating whatever that thing was.
Right, because the kid will... That's an ego battle. Like the adults... have access to psychology. They have access to sort of try to figure out how to get the kid what the kid needs, and to keep peace in the house, and to educate the kid without getting into an ego battle with the kid, of drawing some line, because that is the fundamentalist Christian way. Kids are little demon objects.
You have to train them to do the right thing.
Fold into good people.
Yes, you have.
So they start with the premise that you're evil, and then they're trying to make you less evil.
Yes.
Right? And that was
because
what they were
original
doing
sin.
To you, is that you were evil and you weren't folding in fast enough. And so that stressed them out.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got divorced, like, thank God you got a divorce. Now we have a reason to get mad at you. Because they didn't really have a reason.
Think of it that way. They didn't think of it that way. No. But I know that it...
They'll deal with that in the afterlife.
The idea that they had about me was proven correct because I got a divorce.
Right.
Instead of, I got a divorce because of the way I was raised and treated.
They did everything they could.
They were just following God's law.
According to that book.
Right.
I saw some comments that were from Twitch way up the line. Are those accessible?
Jeremy. Yeah, we were talking.
Oh, you already covered all that?
We talked about Jeremy. Dinah Olsen McLeod says, I've been a black sheep for many years, and at first it bothered me, but then I realized it is my life, and it didn't matter what anyone thought. You can't please everyone, so you have to please yourself. Life is way too short. Their loss. I really appreciate that mentality. And I hope to get there someday.
It's harder for you to do that.
It's harder for me because I'm not just talking about my mom and dad. I'm fixated on trying to have restitution with my mom because she is still in possession of the hearts of my 6 younger siblings who I raised.
Right.
And I want to be in those kids' lives, and I have to get through my mom to do it. So that's what's going on for me there. Gilbert says, having someone like Rick Perry from the New Apostolic Church in charge of America's nuclear arsenal is terrifying. They're religious extremists. I have a hard time seeing the difference between their holy war and that of a jihad.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Jihad sounds scary, but the evangelical Christians are, they say you become that which you fight. You take on the energy and the attributes of that upon which you focus. And it's imperative for that kind of Christianity to have an externalized enemy. And that externalized enemy could be Muslims. It can be people who failed, because it only shows their own frailty. Maybe they could fail too. It only brings home their own mortality and their faith. So having an externalized enemy is really important, and that's also, it's essential for controlling mass populations is to have an externalized enemy. That's why the evangelicals are such a great tool for Donald Trump. Can I read? Can we take a little sidebar for a second? I want to read one thing.
Sure, and I do
related.
want to keep differentiating that there are so many wonderful, loving, non-judgmental, democratically socialist Christians who actually do want to take care of people and love people and leave the judging up to God.
Right.
That is not how I was raised. We're not talking about those Christians.
No, we're not talking about those folks. That's a different group. And that's the thing that if you've never, that's the thing that's hard. I sort of jokingly say I got slipped a bad God when I was a kid. Like at a party somewhere in 1972, my dad slipped me a bad God.
Right.
He got sucked into
That's a great metaphor.
A televangelist. And there's a lot of gods out there. There's a lot of versions of the big G. There's a lot of versions. There's a lot of religion. How many? 6,000 different kinds of Christianity, I guess. And all those have a sort of different bent on who Big G is. Right. I got a bad one, and it's like those people that have sworn off tequila after a bad tequila night. Like it hurt you so bad, the smell of tequila makes you want to vomit.
Right, like maybe you shouldn't have mixed it with so much sugar. Like there are other reasons. There are, in any given situation, there are other reasons why you got hurt.
Right, so that
are maybe not the first one you think of.
I'm the first one to say, yeah, I got a bad God, and I'm not blaming, I'm not assuming you can't be having a good, happy, healthy time with the G that you got. I'm not assuming that. I want to throw this one little piece out. It's maybe out of order, but there's this lady, Emily Gorchinsky.
Well, we're working our way up to talking about loves and unconditional loves.
Yes, and this is kind of a sidebar before we get there. Emily of the State is her Twitter handle, but Emily Gorchinsky, she has this series of tweets that I think are really interesting in relation to this topic. So the main tweet is, Trump doesn't speak in full coherent sentences because he's speaking a different language. One his followers understand, but we do not. It's fascinating in a Dharmak and Jalad at Tanagra sense.
What the heck?
I don't know what that means. It's in quotes. He begins a clause and finishes it with nonsense filler words. But his followers have already used their bias to fill in the meaning. This is really the important part.
Right. You use the correct trigger words, people will assume we're on the same side.
The sentence makes perfect sense to his followers. A large number of Muslim refugees caused a problem that the lying media isn't reporting.
Get up.
Go. This style of speaking reinforces the biases of the listener, and that's why it's so dangerous. We can't treat it as if Obama is speaking constitutional law. Trump says it like it is, but saying the first part of a thought and letting the listener fill in the rest exactly as it is in their mind. So that's why people can't understand why he's got so many fans.
So can you paraphrase that one? Or restate it?
So he does the same thing that the traditional idea of an oracle does, which is you say a thing that then evokes something in the listener's mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if you're doing the I Ching, there's only 64 hexagrams, but one hexagram, when you read it, it might evoke a situation you have at work this week. It might evoke a situation that's happening on the planet next week. It might evoke, it depends on what that word, those sort of vague words are triggers to evoke meaning. In Trump, all he has to do is say Muslim, and for evangelicals, a meaning is evoked.
Right.
Right? And if he doesn't clarify it,
what he means by,
they get to do the paint by number. They get to see him as somebody who's talking their language because he's talking nonsense. They're the ones that are making sense of his nonsense. And I think that's why he's so potent. And that's what happens in these fundamentalist religions, is that like, in an oracular sense, they lay down a basic law, and then you create the rest in your own head and think it's that law. Think it's that world. So
I mean, I think it's always a good idea when you're talking with someone, if there are any emotions being called up, or you have any inkling at all that it's an important conversation, define your terms.
Yeah.
Figure out what perspective the other person is coming from, because it's probably not the same perspective as you. So, people make assumptions all the time. I figured out what was wrong with the dogs.
What?
So, Billie Jean is a very smart dog.
Yeah.
For all her fluffiness and her needs for snacks. And a couple days ago, she was sleeping on Tulsa's bed.
Yeah.
And Tulsa was pouting about it because he can't really climb under the table to sleep on Billie Jean's bed. And I came out in the kitchen and made Billie Jean get off of Tulsa's bed. And since we started this live stream, Tulsa has been sleeping on Billie's bed.
So Billie just was trying to get us to do.
We had a sibling rivalry moment.
Fair treatment.
She's like, you kicked me off Tulsa's bed. She has been back and forth under this table, bugging both of us for the last hour.
All right.
And I didn't want to think that was what was going on, but I think that's really what was going on. There's peace in the house now. Tulsa didn't want to sleep on his bed because it's in a narrow space. He's got to be able to guard the room. Anyway, I feel satisfied in having figured that out. Take care of your beasties. Doesn't matter if they're children or dogs. Take the time to get on their perspective and what matters to them.
We're in a live stream right now.
I know! This is important. This is like the #1 problem between children and parents.
They're in the middle of important things. We can't listen to you right now.
They're in the middle of a different perspective than the parent is.
Yeah.
The kid is having a sugar crash, or they're really excited about their favorite movie poster, and you just want to finish grocery shopping. They have a different value set than you do.
I looked up the Four Loves.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book yet. Like what I thought was really interesting is last week. Here's a little bit of synchronicity.
Ooh, synchronicity.
Last week, we did our show, and then I got a message from a friend of the show, a listener, who I'm friends with on Facebook, but I don't think we've had a lot of drop-in conversations before. So this is the note that I got after our show last week.
We love getting those sorts of notes from people.
So last week I was like, we should talk about the Four Loves. We should do that. And then we didn't do it. We didn't talk about it at all last week. We did, and then, so I get this note from Jay, and he says, "Hi, Dark. Just wanted to say that I absolutely love the Post-Orthodoxy podcast post that you guys do. In relation to this last episode, I was curious to know if you guys have read C.S. Lewis's book, More Christianity. In there, he talks about the commandment pertaining to parents, something like thou shalt not disrespect parents. He goes on to interpolate this in a very meaningful way, not in a stifling, classic manner, from what I recall, his statements were very in line with those made in today's post. Anyway, hope that was somewhat helpful, and I'm looking forward to the next topic."
And then I was like, I gotta look up C.S. Lewis' Four Loves.
So I looked up C.S. Lewis with this parenting thing, and it was something from the book Four Loves, which I thought was synchronistic. So I read that, you found it, you shared it, and I read it. And the gist was, yes, you should honor your elders. However, you don't get carte blanche just for being older. You actually have to. You actually have to. You actually have to deserve. You get the treatment you deserve.
What about respect the uniform?
What about it?
Well, that's a hugely important thing in the West.
I don't
respect the uniform, whether it's your pastor or your dad or your soldiers or your president.
The Milgram experiments cured me of that.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna share a link to that.
The Milgram experiment cured me of that. You can't just let somebody with authority run the show.
Which we do though.
Without some kind of challenge.
You guys are gonna want to open this link and save it to read later. It's really unfortunate. The gist of it is that they brought people into. They brought people into a room and they said, the person on the other side of the glass is a criminal.
No.
No, you better tell me.
No, so there were people who were paid to be a part of this experiment. And they're all in the same room. And they're like, some of you people are going to be behind the wall. Some of you people are going to be over here with the button. And so the people who went behind the wall, nothing happened to them. They just had voice actors in there.
But you didn't know that.
They didn't know that. The people who had the button, their job was whenever the guy in the lab coat says, push this button, you're going to electroshock this person in the other room.
Okay.
And this person is trying to complete a task. And if they can do it or don't do it, then they shock them. So, and they were supposed to incrementally boost the shock.
To make it more.
To make it worse every time the person failed. So each person got paid $5 to come in and be a part of this experiment.
This was the olden days.
So this is 1950s.
Ooh, $5.
So somebody would be sitting there and they are listening to what's happening in the other room and they're asking, they hear the supposed victim being treated badly by the doctor because they're not doing the thing right. Mm. And so like you have to shock them. So the guy would shock them and you would hear the person say, ouch. Mm-hmm. And then the next time they would scream. Mm-hmm. And then the next time you could tell, and there's a little number on the button where it says this is getting into the dangerous territory. Mm-hmm. But the guy in the lab coat in the room goes, this is a part of the experiment, go ahead. And a vast majority of the people would push the button beyond safe levels and potentially kill the person in the other room. Because they were paid $5 to be in an experiment, and this was a part of the experiment, and the guy in the lab coat said it was fine. They didn't have enough judgment to say, I'm not going to push that button anymore. I'm not going to be party to hurting that person.
So many of the people that we interact with in our post-orthodoxy conversations are people who have come into their own sovereignty, people who have taken authority over themselves, people who don't just do things because someone else tells them it's right or wrong. Mm-hmm. You must be aware that there are millions and millions and millions of people on the planet who do really only make choices based on what somebody else has told them.
Who's in charge?
Who's in charge and what are the rules?
As long as I'm within the rules and I'm doing what somebody in charge said, then I'm blameless.
Yep.
I don't have to...
Even if I do kill this person by over-shocking them, it's not my fault.
I'm not culpable.
So it's okay to just do what the authority figure says. And there have been marvelous stories throughout the years. Oh, what is wrong with you? Am I not giving you enough attention?
She's fine.
There have been marvelous stories of people who have taken their own sovereignty and thrown off the prescribed authority of just do what the boss says and started revolutions and freed people and made amazing changes. But those are the rarities. I am aware that I still worry about breaking the rules. I'm in a transitional space.
Yeah.
I am still worried that someone's going to come along eventually and tell me that I was messing up this whole time and I should have kept following the rules like I knew I was supposed to do. Even in day-to-day situations with friends, like my friend Barb, only through listening to this show has she come to the realization that like I really actually do worry about breaking the rules all the time. Mm. She kind of thought I was joking. Right. Like our whole friendship, I stayed with her for a couple of months, and I would be worried about her opinion on things I was doing, even though she's not my mom. I was just staying with her.
She was the local authority.
I didn't want to break the rules of the house I was staying in or the relationship of the, like, because relationships are rules. And if you want to be in a good relationship with somebody, you have to follow the rules of that relationship. That's what I got out of my Christian upbringing.
Right.
Relationships are rules, and if you want a good relationship, you follow the rules of that relationship.
And if you don't know what the rules are, it's chaos and it's scary.
Anxiety-inducing, ulcer-forming chaos.
Right.
And so, yeah, anyway. Some people might protest that obviously you wouldn't do a bad thing just because an authority figure told you to. And I'd be like, that's great that you have sovereignty over yourself and you know yourself well enough that you know what's right and wrong, even if an authority figure tells you something else. Most people aren't like that. I'm still struggling. I'm in the transition.
Our friend of the show, Audrey. Astrid. Why do I keep calling her Audrey?
I don't know.
Astrid commented.
Astrid from Sweden, foreign correspondent. Thank you for joining us.
She said there's a beautiful saying from Sicily, or a chorus, can't remember. Live your own life, you will die your own death. I interpret it not only as making your own choices, but also as letting others, your children, parents, and siblings, make their choices. So, yes, live your own life if you know that you have one.
Right.
And that's kind of the point that we're talking about. When you're raised in a mind control cult, you don't know what that is.
That's not a real concept. Your life belongs to God.
You don't know what your own mind is. You don't know what's good for you. I mean, it took me 30 years of getting out of the cult to actually figure it out.
Well, and for the upbringing that I was given, you know that your own mind is most likely sinful and selfish.
Yeah, right. You're always wary of the first thing that comes up to your own thoughts because you were told to second guess that stuff every time.
So Astrid said, I interpret it not only as making your own choices, but also letting others, such as your children, parents, or siblings, make their choices. So, and then Gilbert says, does a relationship based on unconditional love have rules?
Yeah, somebody else said something earlier about like unconditional love doesn't mean that it's free for all completely.
Right.
So do you want to talk about your idea?
We need to talk about that because, like,
unconditional love.
Greater love has no man than this, but that he lays down a life for his friend. That's the Bible verse. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, John 3:16. That's the core of Christianity, is that when we didn't deserve it, for Christ died for our sins once for everybody, not for the righteous, he died for the unrighteous to bring us to God. Jesus died for us as messed up people. That's the Christian story. And I say that because I understand that our audience includes people in various places in the borderlands. And even though I don't live a super evangelical Christian life anymore, I know lots of wonderful Christian people, and I want to include the whole audience.
Yes, right.
So
I can be harsh because of the bad God that I got. And I often have to reiterate that, like, there's some wonderful Christians living their best lives. That are having a really great time.
And being loving and kind.
Exemplars of what the thing's supposed to be about. But there's also a lot of Christians not doing that. And it doesn't have anything to do with being Christian or not Christian. There's
a lot of Buddhists not doing that either.
Yeah. I've met some jerks who were Buddhists.
Right.
So, like, it's not a matter of the religion. There's every type of person in every type of group.
And a lot of it does have to do with sovereignty. If you
Yes.
think you can make your own choices for your own health, you are probably going to practice spirituality healthfully.
And you may not be giving money to the church so much anymore. Unless you know exactly where that money's going and what it's doing and helping homeless people or whatever, and you totally pool your money into that kind of thing.
Right. So, unconditional love.
We're not bashing Christians.
No.
We're talking about some bad Christian experiences, which I think need to be talked about.
And we can only speak to those. I can't speak to bad Jewish experiences. Stop. I can't speak to bad... That's a special love note. No, it's sand. Sandpaper. Sorry. I can't speak to bad Jewish experiences because I didn't grow up Jewish. I'm speaking to my unhappy and unhealthy Christian experience.
Yeah. And
the things that I'm learning about my potential for having a healthier experience from now on. I've been wondering, am I exhibiting unconditional love towards my mom by putting up a boundary that I am requesting to be loved by her healthfully?
Well, I'll skip that question and go to you have to love yourself first.
What does that even mean?
Exactly. That's a hard one.
Barf.
Well,
Barf me with your Disney follow your heart crap.
No. Well, that's what the Christians tell you not to do, right?
Yes.
So, like, you have to know yourself first to know what's healthy for you. Nobody else can tell you what's healthy for you. Like, maybe a nutritionist can, but then there's another nutritionist that's going to tell you totally different information.
Mm-hmm.
You yourself have to figure out what all these choices are and see in the effects of those things what is right for you. Bread is good for people, not good for other people. You can't say bread is this for you. It is this for them. Well, it's not this for them.
The kind of Christianity that I was raised in does say
I know,
certain things are right for everyone. And certain things are wrong for everyone.
So you understand what I'm saying? Before you can decide if you're acting out of unconditional love to somebody else, you have to figure it out for yourself. You have to figure out what is right for you. And what you're doing is you're setting a boundary for your own health, for your own mental health and emotional health. You set a boundary because you felt you were being spied on by your own mother.
To put it bluntly.
She was spying on you. She's not responding to your inquiries or desire to have a dialogue. She's peeping. She's snooping.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're like, well, I don't think it's fair that you get to snoop in my life and then not respond to me. Okay. So that is you dealing with love for yourself and making sure that you are healthy, because if you're not whole and healthy, how good are you for the folks around you?
If it ain't down in the well, it's not coming up in the bucket.
So it doesn't matter what this is to her, because at this point she's not being a fair player.
So Bryn says, because you love someone unconditionally does not mean you just stand there when they try to run you over. I think my mom totally agrees with you, Bryn. I agree with Bryn, and so does my mom. Just because she loves me unconditionally doesn't mean she's just going to stand there and let me break her heart over and over and over again.
That's so funny. So let's talk about the 4 loves.
Like, I'm not joking.
So of the 4 loves, empathy bond is number 1.
What's that in Greek?
Storge is empathy bond. You have a lot of empathy.
Okay.
You have a lot of empathy for your mom and her position. She's not able to have the same empathy for you.
Okay.
It seems to me.
Well, what are you saying by that? What do you mean empathy bond or have empathy? What's the result?
4 loves. So like 1 love is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like and that's a feeling, right? You see somebody hit their thumb with a hammer and you have a adverse experience. That's not something that's necessarily logical. That's some sort of empathic thing. You may not even like that person, but you can still wince when they hit their thumb.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because you're feeling the human experience, not that person necessarily that person's experience.
Okay. So I empathize with my mother's suffering, but she might not be empathizing with my suffering.
She doesn't have the ability to.
We hypothesize.
No. She's in a cult. She's in a closed system. You're outside that system.
She can't
You're dealing in different rules and a different reality. She cannot.
She's not allowed to empathize with my suffering because I'm supposed to be suffering because I sinned. So she can't be sad about it.
Right. So she doesn't have that. She can't share that empathy with you.
Okay.
Because she's at a disadvantage being in a closed system. You're not in a closed system.
Mm-hmm.
So going through the 4 loves, you have the empathy bond, philios, which is a friend bond.
Mm-hmm.
That could also be familiar, I guess. Family. Familial.
Yeah.
Eros, which is romantic love.
Right.
And then agape, which is this unconditional God love. Agape, to me, is like, I feel connected to life. I feel connected to other humans. And so I feel like if there's something unhealthy in my environment that's affecting somebody over there, it is affecting me. Because that person's unhealthy experience is going to lead to unhealthy behavior that I will end up interacting with or dealing with. So like, there's the old Union wobbly phrase, which is an injury to one is an injury to all. And that's about people in the Union, but that's the way I feel about humans and life in general. Like, if you just go kick a deer in the head for no reason, I also feel that thing. Like, I love that deer because that deer is a part of the life and a part of the system, and you're creating disharmony.
Agape love has often also been described as the sacrificial love. It's the most giving of the loves.
To me, that feels unconditional.
Yeah.
Because if you're in the life game, you get it.
Well, I mean, I think you can have some really exegetical and esoteric conversations about how can one ever be not a Christian?
What?
Can you ever be out of the fold? Like you can have there's some deep arguments deep in the bowels of the church about whether or not if you become a Christian, are you ever actually not a Christian after that point? If you just look at the Bible, it kind of seems like once you've joined the club, you're in the club. You've agreed to be part of the club. You might make lots of mistakes, but if grace is grace, and God is love, and Christ died for the unrighteous, and there's nothing you can do to separate yourself from the love of God, then you don't just fall out of the club because you make a mistake. That's agape. God is agape. You don't ever become unloved. It's a hard thing for people to swallow the other way around, too. You don't earn God's love. God didn't pick you to be in his club because you're special. You didn't earn to be loved by God. He just loves you.
Like, I love Donald Trump in an agape sense.
What? Oh. Yeah.
Right? I mean, I can't just select people who are living beings and take them out of the equation.
Right.
I can love him in an agape sense and totally be a harsh critic of his behavior and what he's doing.
So how would that...
But I can still love him.
How would unconditional... How would your love be expressed if you were called upon to express your love for Donald Trump? What would that situation look like?
Express my love for Donald Trump?
Is love a verb or a noun? And if you can sit here on your butt and say, I love Donald Trump.
Right.
If you were ever called upon to verb love him, what would that look like?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe I need to find another subject that's easier. But I bring it up because it's an extreme thing. You know, cancer is multiplication of cells, right? It's cells that multiply to the point where they damage the organisms that they're a part of.
You're about to get real wacko, I can tell.
Am I?
Go for it.
You saw me staring off into the distance?
I know where you're headed.
Do you? So, I can, there's a point in me whenever I was getting out of the Judeo-Christian thing, the black and white, the right and wrong world, where I needed to understand the difference between judgment and discernment, because it wasn't up for me to judge, right? It's up to this other authority to judge. My parents, the state, God, they get to judge. I don't get to do any of that, right? And so when I was getting out of that kind of mindset and I was wrestling with the idea of judgment, do I get to judge a Christian who's doing terrible things in the name of the Lord?
Right.
Do I get to judge that as bad?
Is your judgment having an opinion about the correctness of the situation, or is your judgment punching them in the face to keep them from waving a Nazi flag at your grandma's funeral? Are you judging by acting, or are you judging as in, I have a judgment of opinion that what you are doing is incorrect?
So I'll go with the opinion part.
Yeah. I think a lot of people...
Because I can see somebody and judge them to be incorrect.
Yes.
And then I thought, well, who am I to judge? So maybe I'm not going to judge anybody because we all came from different backgrounds. We all got different information. We're working with different tools.
I'm not going to think badly about anybody for what they do.
I'm not going to be judgmental. I decided I was not going to be judgmental.
That's what I'm saying. What do you mean by be judgmental?
It was me trying to forgive people in the cult that I came from.
Okay.
So rather than hating them for torturing me, as I thought, I decided, well, that's just where they came from, and that's just what they did, and I'm my own person, they're their own person, I can make my own choices now, I can love them as organisms now,
yes,
and not judge them
not be mad at them for what
not
they
be
did
mad
to you.
at them, which was a huge relief.
And I'm
not
only
carry that
being
around.
really pushy because
Yeah.
people have very different opinions of what judgment means.
Exactly.
My
Well,
parents,
that's where I'm going. That's where I'm
okay,
going.
okay.
Because then, when I stopped judging people, I found myself in a lot of trouble because there's a lot of shady characters. There were people who I'm like, well, I'm not going to judge them.
Mm-hmm.
And they took advantage of that,
Mm-hmm.
of me not being discerning. And that's what I learned, is that I can be discerning. It's not up to me to judge another person and where they came from and what they did. But I can discern whether or not that's a healthy thing or an unhealthy thing, whether that's good for me to be around or not good for me to be around, or whether that's
you can love them unconditionally and choose to not be around them.
Right. Like a snake.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to kill all the snakes because then we'd have an overflow of rats.
Mm.
So you can love the snake for what it does, but you don't want to pick it up and put it around your neck, right? That's the difficult thing that I came. And that's what I look at. Like Donald Trump he is a market force. He is an aspect of our culture, and we created him, right? Donald Trump this is a democracy, right? He wouldn't be the president unless we had fostered, all of us as a collective, fostered a reality where he was elevated to the top. It wasn't that he was elevated because he was Donald Trump. It's because we glorified the rich for decades. We let sociopathy become something to shoot for. Extreme wealth to be something to shoot for.
Mm-hmm.
Wealth beyond what you could ever use to be something to be admired.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for me to just look at Donald Trump and say, I hate that guy, is to really be self-loathing, because we fostered that culture. We did, it's like we didn't, we allowed Apprentice to become a #1 show or #4 show or whatever number it was. We allowed those things to happen over and over because in themselves they seemed fairly harmless, kind of entertaining. And then it gets to the point where people are dying because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so who do you blame? Do you blame him for that? You can't just put it all on him. You got to blame the environment that allowed that to happen. And so I have the same, when you come from a cult where you have people who are like, I honestly believe my parents thought they were doing the best thing for me to join that stupid cult and give them a bunch of money and beat us according to their rules. Like I really think they probably thought they were doing the right thing. So do we just allow that to happen and not be judgmental about it? Or at one point do you have to say, you're toxic? At what point do you get to be that authority where you get to discern between what is healthy and unhealthy for your community, not just for you?
Sometimes, as I was pondering this concept of unconditional love and the 4 kinds of love, sometimes it's really hard to talk about an abstract without some practical, to put feet on it and figure out, like trying to ask you, like, what do you mean you love Donald Trump? Like, what would that look like if you were called upon to actually put evidence out there of your love for Donald Trump? Mark French brought up a great example. If Donald Trump was dying of thirst in the desert, I would give him water.
Exactly. Right. That's what I'm talking about. That's perfect.
Right. I am not going to be the person that decide, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Mm-hmm. It is not on us neighbors to punish each other, in a sense. It's on the nature. But then, it comes down to what would be a new morality if religion were suddenly ripped from the fabric of society, if evangelical Christianity and the moral codes that it came with, like we've had a variety of amazing moral codes.
Yes.
Throughout the course of human history, such as the Code of Hammurabi.
Mm-hmm.
It was a moral code pre any kind of organized religion.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, or...
I don't even remember, man. I studied ancient Babylon so long ago.
Is that the golden rule?
No, the golden rule is treat other people how you would want to be treated. And that is, there are examples of that rule all over world religions. But the Code of Hammurabi is just super ancient. It's like ancient Sumeria. It was like praised as like one of the very first religious codes. Not religious. Very first like civil or moral code.
282 rules.
Yeah.
It established standards for commercial interactions, set fines and punishments to meet the requirements of justice. It was carved onto a massive finger-shaped black stone that was looted by invaders. Finally rediscovered in 1901.
Yeah.
So the summary there's a lot of rules going on. It's not the simple. It's not the iPhone, I think.
No. So Christians think that God created morality and enforces morality.
Right.
And he created morality because Adam and Eve sinned by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and now they know how to be good or bad, whereas before they only knew how to be good. And now every human is born broken and selfish and will choose to be bad unless someone enforces an external moral code on them. And so I say all of that just to try to put some feet on the conversation of unconditional love, that what if the most basic necessary moral code ever was just do no harm?
That's pretty basic.
Like, seek your own happiness and healthiness.
Right.
And
do unto others.
But if seeking your own happiness causes you to harm someone else or infringe upon someone else's rights, then it cannot be correct.
Okay. Well, where does someone stop?
What do you mean?
So if you want to go dig the Berkeley pit and create an ungodly hellscape for all of eternity for humans to have to deal with, did you hurt someone? Did you hurt a community? Did you potential for harm? Like, he's just doing what he wants. He wants to go dig a hole and make some money.
Well, that's a super easy question.
Is it?
It's super easy.
Okay, what happened?
His actions cause harm.
His actions caused harm.
Dennis Washington digging the Berkeley pit.
No, he didn't do he's doing Continental Pit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoever did the Berkeley pit or the Continental pit, those actions caused harm. They might not have known they were going to cause harm when they did it.
Anaconda Company.
But now that we know that those actions caused harm, restitution should be made.
Right. And so should all future mining stop because of the damage, the untold damage that will occur over, in the future?
I think that's a really valid proposition to be made, but it will probably be unattainable because of capitalism.
Right.
I think that I could hypothesize.
Yeah.
That no actions should be made, that we should be dedicating ourselves to building an infrastructure that does not need to harm the earth in order to survive. So platinum mines for cell phones.
So that would be right. All right, so we've gone off on a little sidebar. So, in terms of codes and rules and laws, where do we start with
codes and rules and laws? Trying to put feet on the concept of unconditional love.
We're not going to get another Hansi Friday.
We're not going to do Hansi again. Yeah. I know. I'm sorry. We're going to have to start a new series.
Yeah.
A Just Hansi series. Put it on our Patreon.
Yeah.
So, unconditional love. I love you, and you are within my love, no matter what your behavior is. However, within unconditional love, I can still make boundaries for my own health and happiness.
Right.
But if me taking action for my own health and happiness harms someone else and infringes upon their rights, it is not a correct action.
That sounds fine.
It sounds pretty solid to me.
Yeah.
I'd love to do a whole bunch of hypothesizing about different situations and whether or not they fit that mold.
Yeah, because you have empathy for your mom, so you think, well, my mom's just doing the thing that according to her rules and reality is fine. At what point, this is where we run into battles of reality. What is reality? And
what is unconditional?
The definition of sanity is majority accepted reality.
Yeah, sorry guys. Reality doesn't exist outside of our perceptions.
So your family is surrounded by a majority of people. Mm-hmm. The majority of the people they surround themselves with live in a very clear, singular reality. Well-defined reality. You don't live in that reality anymore. And so you look insane.
Yes.
Because you've done something that is unhealthy according to their reality.
Yes.
To me, they look insane because they're doing something unhealthy right now in their relationship with you.
According to your reality.
According to my reality. They've decided that they're not going to look at you, see you, talk to you, hear you. because of the premise of their reality, which is you're sick.
Yes.
So
we're at an impasse.
You're at an impasse.
We're
How do you solve that? These are
to the point
different realities.
where I'm realizing we're at an impasse. And that's kind of like probably the last email I'm going to send my mom.
So that's where you have compassion for those folks, but it's like you can only throw so many
logical bricks
or lifesavers to people you think are drowning. If they don't want to be tugged into your worldview, you can't make them, can't make them. So that's where you just have to be the example. You just have to have a good time. Really. And I think it's important to have a good time. I think it's important to show people that when you've left the thing, you actually had a good life. Because that's what got me out. People who left, and you're like, oh my God, they're going to get eaten by the monsters. And they don't.
They were actually healthier and happier.
And even though they're doing everything wrong from your perspective, you're looking at them and going, they got a nice glow going on.
I'm terrified though. We talk about doubling down a lot. So people have worldviews and perspectives, and then they come to a point in their life where some part of that worldview is challenged, and you either begin to incorporate the challenge and let your worldview shift and change, or you have a worldview that cannot change, or it isn't true, and so you double down and use your energy to ignore the evidence against your worldview being correct. And I'm almost afraid that in spite of my desire to be involved in my siblings' lives and show them that I'm okay and I'm happier and healthier now, that by doing that, I will cause them to have to double down that their worldview is correct and double down in thinking of everything that I'm doing as crazy, because otherwise their entire belief system will fall apart.
That's the problem when you're dependent on a cult. And when you're a kid, you don't get to make that choice.
You don't have choices to leave.
So
it can't be okay that I left.
Right, they could, so like your siblings could, if they saw you clearly and were able to say, she got out, she's fine, she's a loving person, I am going to pursue that, which will then cause them to doubt their reality, which then makes you a doubly worse bad person in the eyes of the church, not just your parents, but the whole damn church.
Right.
Makes you that's the danger. That's the danger that you are, is that you may cause doubt to occur in the solidness of their reality. So that is a real dance to have to do, is to be able, how do you stay in contact with people when your very existence challenges the foundation of what they consider all of reality.
Right. If Ainsley is out there being healthier and happier, then maybe she's not apostate. And that means maybe I could make other choices to be healthier and happier.
They can't. Then they got to rebel. They got to be like a runaway at 14 or something, because they are dependent on food and shelter from people who...
Or they just start having strife with the parents.
Right.
Just strife.
Right. And luckily, the younger kids have an easier time because parents wear out over time.
Unfortunately for my mom. Anna says, it's helped me to love those who hurt me in cult church. In the cult church I was in. It has helped me to love them when I remember how brainwashed my family became. I try not to think of most of them as terrible people, although it's extremely hard not to think of the lead pastor as horrible, if I'm honest.
Right.
If I am honest, then they are very brainwashed and trapped. Isn't it funny? Because that's what they think about us.
Yes.
We have been brainwashed away from the truth.
Right.
And we are trapped in Satan's clutches.
Right.
Anna continues, they probably have a lot of emotional problems that they can't address because, like Ainsley mentioned earlier, they can't trust their own brain or intuitions or gut.
Right.
I was told not to trust my gut feelings and that my heart is deceitful. It's in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's all they know. I believe that it is extremely deeply ingrained. They have no open-mindedness. They can't handle anyone living differently or thinking anything other than their teachings. Even if your mother loves you, it doesn't mean that her actions aren't toxic. I think that like many people in my cult, she is probably very brainwashed. It's so hard for me to think that it is okay for me to desire to hold my mother accountable for her behavior when she didn't mean to be bad. And this is part of what we talked about last week. My mother did not mean to hurt me. She, in fact, intended to give me eternal life. So how can I desire to hold her accountable for how she hurt me when she wasn't meaning to hurt me and was, in fact, trying really hard to give me the best life? No wonder we can't ever have an email conversation.
It's a tough one.
How would I ever be able to have a conversation with her where I said, the things that you thought you were doing to love me and give me eternal life actually hurt me horribly and caused my marriage to fail? She can't have that conversation.
I made the mistake.
You guys are participating in my life therapy.
Yes. I decided I was going to be big because my parents.
Anna.
Yes, thank you for taking the time to articulate all that. My family, my dad, pretty abusive, white supremacist, racist.
Physically abusive or just emotionally abusive?
Physically abusive, emotionally abusive, spiritually abusive. But in his mind, he's just a rageaholic trying to obey some very strict rules. And
he doesn't think of himself as a rageaholic. He's just trying to raise you right.
Trying to raise me right. And so, struggled to try to have communication after I got out of the house because now I'm on my own. So now I can talk to as an adult. Didn't want to do it. Went through all my sort of the things that you're going through, trying to rectify my parents' love for me, for the abuse that I felt from them, and then how do I have a relationship with them when I feel wronged, and then getting over feeling wronged, and okay, I can love them as humans. And then I got over it so well that I had them out for lunch when they were traveling through California, and then I told them about how I had gotten over all the things that I hated them for. It didn't go over very well.
Right.
I thought I was being really kind. I thought I was you know what, you guys were total jerks. I didn't say it this way. This is the fun game.
Right.
I actually, I found some yogas that allowed me to heal from the traumas, and now I can see you as equals. And that terrified them and upset them so much because they had no idea what I was talking about.
You were living in a reality completely outside of the reality they live in.
They don't remember doing anything wrong, really.
It wasn't wrong to them.
It was.
They didn't think they were doing things wrong.
They did. They just forgot. Some things they know they messed up.
Maybe a few things.
Strangling my sister, trying to kill her for parking the car in the wrong place. At one point,
probably knows that wasn't right.
You got to kind of know that's not the right thing to do.
Okay, I'm speaking from my parents' perspective, and I apologize.
Right. No, there's some things they know they did wrong. They blocked out because of the cult, and and the cult wasn't always responsible. They were not emotionally balanced people. That's why they chose the cult. They were not happy-centered, healthy people. That's why they chose an authority to give their life to, because they couldn't do it themselves. So when I said, you know what, I'm not going to hold you responsible for all those bad choices, they were insulted and terrified that I had assumed that they made bad choices. So that's when I just gave up on the whole thing. God bless them. I love them as humans in an agape way, but we have no way to communicate, no way to talk on any kind of real thing beyond a sports score or something. So at one point, for me, it's just it's almost like when you're dealing with certain kinds of clay, once it dries, it's dry. So you're not going to soften it up again.
Oh, that's a biblical metaphor. For making sure you train children to do the right thing while they're young.
Yeah, well, my parents are pretty solid now, and they're not open to change. And I'm not going to break my own heart trying to get them to see the world that I see. They can't get it, and I had to give up.
I really hope that even during my efforts to have healthy, productive communication with my mom, she doesn't cut me off from my siblings.
You're a danger. She, in her world, would be justified completely in doing so.
Even if she were to be completely selfless and allow me to continue to have a relationship with my siblings when I refuse to have a relationship with her, she would be completely justified from her perspective in just cutting me off from them.
Yeah.
And I'm like terrified of that.
Right.
All the time. We've done 2 hours. We can't talk anymore.
Thanks for playing, folks.
We're not going to be able to fit anything extra into our radio show when we air this on KBMF on Sunday.
Right.
I'm going to say some things on our live stream that I can't say
it
for the radio show. Guys, follow KBMF online. We're on hiatus right now because of coronavirus. But there are links on our Facebook page to some really awesome archival shows that you can listen to on your phone from anywhere. Blues shows, rock and roll shows, talk shows, Irish country dancing shows, all kinds of music. I'm also going to make a special request that you guys who are on Instagram, go and follow us on Instagram. I'm trying to build up a following there. We're going to make a Facebook group eventually too. I'm still figuring everything out, but every little bit of interaction helps, and I do a lot of reposting. So if you do any kinds of trauma awareness posting or ex-evangelical conversational posting, I would love to share your content. I would love to be connected with people that you follow on Instagram that you found really healing and helpful. Jenny Blue says, when people judge or are overly critical of others, it's because they are very unhappy inside, self-critical. It makes sense these people fall into cult lives. Kudos to both of you in your journey, and I love you. And we love you too so much, Jenny.
Somebody hit the angry face like 1,000 times, and it wasn't me this week.
Really?
Just angry faces were just flowing up.
Oh, I wish I could have seen the emojis so I would know.
Who it was.
Tell us who you were. What were you angry about?
But usually I do the angry face just to
make it look interesting.
I like the color.
If nobody's gotten angry at our live stream, then is it even worth listening to?
Oh my God! All the things are coming up now. There's likes and smileys, and I'm gonna do more angry faces.
You guys are awesome.
I also want to say that we have our podcast page with no podcasts on it. We have to go back from number 1 and move forward to whatever episode this is, 37 or whatever it is. Load them all up. So, and we've taken a long time to actually put together a Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page. So we're going to put together a community page.
Yeah, a group where we can have conversations.
So we can have these communications in the course of the week. And the folks who are interested in these kind of conversations can maybe kind of help shape the dialogue for upcoming shows.
Totally.
We've been doing a lot of the footwork, but now there's more and more people that are getting involved and listening and have really
we have a lot of lurkers,
perspectives to share.
Lurkers who listen in.
So we're going to start a Post-Orthodoxy Facebook group this week. We'll have that online for next week.
I have also created a Patreon, and what Patreon is a way for other broke people or patrons of the arts to support folks like me and Dark who are spending a large portion of our week researching and preparing for these shows and then doing these live streams and interacting with people online afterwards. We really want to do this for a living. And I like the idea of being able to do this for a living in such a way that I can support other people who are doing stuff like this for a living. I would love to have extra to give to people to help be funding someone creating content that I care about. And that's what Patreon is for, is that you can be part of funding and enabling content that you think is good for the world, whether it's comics or podcasts or short films or artwork. Patreon is a really great website to take a look at. I wrote a lot of funny stuff on our Patreon, and I would love your feedback on what I wrote. Basically, for $5 a month, we say thank you guys on our weekly live stream, these live streams here. If we make a certain amount of money every month, we will have more time to do more shows like this. So we can make the Hansi Freinacht show a separate show that patrons will have access to on our Patreon live stream. And Billie Jean, you have a problem, and I know you don't have a problem, so you're making it up, so go lay down.
Yeah.
She's just excited because we're not paying attention to her, and she hasn't gone to GO on a WALK recently. We also would like to get to a point where we can be doing these sorts of conversations 4 or 5 times a week, like a job, where we prepare content, have the conversations on the live streams, air it as a podcast, and develop a community where we can all be supporting each other in the borderlands beyond these sorts of belief systems.
We're dealing with our personal stories, and we're also zooming out and looking at, I'm really interested in the time that we're in right now because I feel like the opportunity has never been better for change to occur in short order, for changes to occur that people did not think were possible to occur, because there's a lot of things happening that nobody ever saw as something that could happen.
Sometimes we talk about our own personal processes in an attempt for those processes to help other people who are going through hard things. And a lot of the times we spend the show talking about mindsets and worldviews about what's going on and how we can all continue to grow.
Yeah, there was a Hopi Indian quote that was basically saying there's a difference between a hole and a portal. And if a portal opens up and you know how to go through it, you go through. Otherwise, you just fall in.
To a hole.
You fall into a hole.
And that depends on your perspective.
And that depends on your perspective. So I feel like I'm an optimistic person about humans and the human endeavor. I'm not one of those people that think that we're a virus with shoes and we should be wiped out. I think that the human condition has been co-opted by some bad players and caused a lot of self-loathing within the species. And I'd like to maybe help us remedy that and realize that we're the bitchin' team that we are, and that we can live in a better world, doing better things, having a better time with each other. We just have to explore it and stop being consumers of culture and be creators of culture. So this is our motivation here.
If we as a species could be loving ourselves more, actually loving ourselves, then we would have it down in the well to love the planet better.
That's what I'm saying. Now back to the radio thing. You've been listening to Post-Orthodoxy on America's Most Radio, KBMF 102.5. This show was recorded on Thursday, the 4th, the 2nd, to be played on Sunday, the...
Lord knows.
Next Sunday. And if you're listening to KBMF right now, you're listening to last week's show. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. That's correct.
Anyway.
Thank you so much. Everybody, you guys make these conversations way more interesting than if Dark and I were just recording in a room alone by ourselves. You're helping us grow. I hope that we've helped you grow. I hope that the things that we talk about on these shows gives you something to ponder and chew on, that you can spread the light around to your loved ones that you interact with. And you never know what little thing might just shift somebody's perception onto a whole new path. So hang in there, guys.
Yeah, we just got a like from somebody.
Gilbert says, that was great. My 12-year-old daughter enjoys it as well. She knows things I couldn't have imagined at her age.
Mark French said, everybody that knows history since Babylon knew this happening. And then he said, we're the bitchin' team.
We are the bitchin' team.
Yeah, there's more of us that are bitchin' than the non-bitchin'.
You think so?
Yeah.
More humans that are bitchin' than non-bitchin' humans.
Yeah, I think...
Let's all find each other.
Yeah,
that's what we want to do. Let's find each other and make the world a better place for everybody else.
When I say non-bitchin', I'm just talking about the sociopaths that don't have empathy for other people or life, that think that the world is an object that can be eaten by them.
A lot of people are so exhausted by what they're going through, they don't have the energy to be bitchin'. And we should be helping each other be not so exhausted so we can all be more bitchin'.
So this is an improvised show every week. And we somehow fill up 2 hours. Thank you for being with us through it and being contributors to the subject matter. And now we have to say goodbye.
We'll be back on Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. And if you'd like there to be more content, support us on Patreon so that we can be doing these live stream shows more than just twice a week. We love you guys.
That's right.
Farewell.